The Japanese were why were Japanese Americans, citizens of the United States, put into concentration camps in the United States? Yeah. So mad at Pearl Harbor and what? Yeah, this idea of this enemy and what made him an enemy. But did they have anything to do with Pearl Harbor?
No.
So it was nothing they did, but it was who they, what they looked like, where they were from, their ethnic background. That is that enemy within, and that is a big step towards something really terrifying. It was only on the West Coast, and it had, just because Japanese Americans could not be trusted because they're Japanese. Just like the Ottoman Empire said Armenians could not be trusted because they're Armenian. Or I think you could take it right to what areas that Germany was going to occupy. Oh, what happened to young men in these camps? They got drafted into the war. So they weren't good, they weren't enough of a citizen to live in their homes. They had to be in prison, but they could fight. Any other ones we could not find? Yeah. Oh yeah. In fact, they segregated the units, and there are two Japanese brigades that fought in Italy with great distinction. One of the highest percentage of awards for valor of any Americans.
They weren't just thrown away.
No. But they only fought in Europe. They fought in Italy. Blacks in the workforce. Oh, what was the name where African Americans started going north? Yeah. Are we still showing off our? Is there something you don't know?
Why are there like, what are those?
Oh, so what happened was for some reason I kept thinking it was out of 50. So I kept writing 50. So I don't know why I kept doing this. So I would take 2 off and I would write 48. And I would say, gee, and then I'd go 50, and I'd go to the brigade, and next one, and I would do the same thing. I have no idea why. So that's why I did it. All right, so I'm really sorry about that. Well, let's get back to blacks, okay, the Great Migration. And so what happened is African Americans started taking jobs, or started going into manufacturing jobs that they never had before. And because of the New Deal, it was against the law to discriminate in arms manufacturing. So that was the big issue, which of course infuriated segregationist, conservative, mostly Democrats. So that's the big deal. Yes?
Can you explain Lend-Lease?
Okay, let's look at Lend-Lease. Lend-Lease, Roosevelt desperately wanted to help countries fighting Nazi Germany. Conservatives in Congress, and some liberals of both parties did not want to get hooked up into another war. But after he was reelected, it barely passed with massive majorities of his own party, still barely passed, where it said this, if you don't have it, make sure you get down, that the United States would give weapons and equipment for war and food and fuel to countries fighting aggression, meaning countries fighting Germany. And the United States then would expect that to be returned in the future. It's like a loan. And then they would pay back the loan down the road. But it wasn't like the debt and borrow money would be down the road. So for example, if they used the tank in 1944, they'll return the tank after the war. Now, were they going to return the tank after the war? No. So this was a way that the United States didn't have to worry about the debt issues and just give their enemies equipment. And so if you didn't get that, that was why they did it. So they wouldn't have to worry about the debt after the war. So the United States is going to give billions to countries fighting aggression, AKA Britain, the Soviet Union, and then dominions like Australia, and then eventually France and everybody else. And it was worth every penny. In fact, probably not enough. The Soviets, we gave about $4 billion worth of weapons to, and they broke the back of the German army. And they love spam. Okay, so it was a way to give weapons and avoid the issue. Any other questions? Does that help? That answer? All right, make sure your name's on, turn them up. I'll give you a few points and get them back to you. Got them all? Cash and carry, double V. Everyone got the zoot suits? Everyone ever seen a zoot suit? They have these big broad shoulders. Kind of like in the back, like they're like a triangle. But it became really a symbol for clothing that Mexican immigrants and also African Americans who came to California because of the job, part of the Great Migration. All right, let's go get to your notes. They look very good. We got names on them. Oh, these had to be in crayon. Pen or pencil is fine on this. I don't know when you pen and had a massive headache using a pen in those. I'm over it. I'm moving on. All right. So do we get to this? Where was the German army stopped? The first turning point of the war. Yeah, the gates of Moscow. Right at the gates of Moscow. Did we get to Moscow? We got to that, right? This is where it was stopped. Perfect. And what fell in a month and a half, surprising everybody? Yeah, France fell in a month and a half. Where did the British pull out their troops? No, Dunkirk. What was the name given to when the Luftwaffe tried to knock the Royal Air Force? What was the secret weapon?
Radar.
Radar, yep. And, oh yeah, and then what? Breaking the Enigma machine. Very good. I almost forgot that. And what mistake, horrific mistake did Hitler make? Resorting to what kind of bombing?
Terror bombing.
And what did they call that?
Oh,
Remember, lightning war was blitzkrieg. So what? No, you're thinking of Sitzkrieg. That's the phony war. The blitz. I know you got all. And so we run. Okay, so the Soviets were attacked, and 19. Did we get this or just put it up?
we got to Hitler going south.
Yeah, we went south for the oil, and so the oil's down here. They didn't have enough men, and the Russians were learning how to fight. They were learning. They still captured thousands of square miles, but the Russians weren't being encircled like they did before. And Hitler originally sent not tanks, but infantry to take Stalingrad, and Stalingrad's a massive city along the river. They didn't have enough forces to surround it like they normally would have done, and therefore they made the decision, Hitler did, I want to take Stalin's city. And they decided to enter the city and fight in the city. And the Soviet army held on by literally their fingertips along the edge of the river and fought building by building, stairway by stairway. They fought in the sewers, and they turned it into a horrific 4-month battle of attrition. One of the most famous battles of the war, the Battle of Stalingrad. They took almost all the city, but they couldn't take it all. And as it got colder and colder, the German supply lines became longer and longer. These are Soviet forces right here. These are German forces in the city. And Hitler became obsessed by Stalingrad. And then the Soviets counterattacked in the winter, surrounded the German forces in there, and turned into one of the most decisive victories of the war. 350,000 German soldiers went into Stalingrad. These are the Soviets on the counterattack, and they began to learn how to use their superior tanks, the T-34. 350,000 went in, 90,000 would surrender. And this is the second turning point. Now the Germans beat. They were decisively beaten. And this would be the beginning of the end. Now let's be clear. The Germans were masters of the defense. They still held most of European Russia. It's going to be hell in Russia. That is where the German army is going to be destroyed. Here's the commander, Field Marshal von Paulus, surrendering. Stalingrad was destroyed. These prisoners, 90% would die, the Soviet prisoners. They would not be released until 1953. They released the other prisoners, but they held on to the ones from Stalingrad that survived in work camps, essentially. Why 1953? Do you remember? Stalin died. That's why they released it. And with that, the German army's back would be broken. And the next year would begin a series of titanic counteroffensives. And the Soviet Union would destroy the German army. 70% of German casualties would be on the the Eastern Front. And so all that spam, we sent the Soviets, they really liked spam. They liked our trucks. They liked our planes. They didn't like our tanks particularly, but it would be decisive for the war effort, especially in aviation fuel, things like that. But now the Germans are occupying all this area. They're going to lose this after Stalingrad, but all through 43, they're still holding most of this. They would hold this into 44. All these areas. And Germany failed to fully mobilize until 1942. So, they also have this issue of total war, where they now are occupying these areas. They're squeezing every resource out of here and starving the Soviet people. But also, remember, we just mentioned this with Japanese interns, there's enemies within that they're not going to be able to super peace and force them east. What now? Well, first off, back to the mobilization. They already have a system intact for this. It was inefficient, but they resorted to their concentration camp system. So they had all these political prisoners. The inverted triangle, the upside down triangle, that meant political prisoner. Red triangle. Green one was like you're actually a criminal. And here are slave laborers in a tin mine right here. And so they had this system. And so what they started to do is just round up people. At first, they kind of made up crimes. Next, they just would round up working age people. So I want to be very clear. If we were, let's say, in France in 1943, all of you would be gone. You're the right age. I'm at the edge. You guys are the right age. They did something similar to that of World War I, but they put them in these slave labor camps. And they used the concentration camp system, now thousands of camps. They made this hellish archipelago of slave laborers. And slave laborers would sometimes they would just be dressed. They would have their normal clothes on. They might even live in cities, but or live in camps right outside, but they would be essentially prisoners. And always with the threat of torture and death, or be put into a concentration camp for torture and death. Or this is within the camps themselves. So for example, Auschwitz was a Polish military base, and that was turned into a concentration camp. And then they built 2 more slave labor camps. This is at the Auschwitz slave labor camp. It's kind of an archipelago. And once they're in the camp, they have to have like the upside down triangle. Here, the Star of David. Star of David's 2 triangles. So one triangle would be gold, one would usually be whatever else they would say they are, like a red one, saying they're political prisoners. Yeah.
So the concentration camps were initially part of the final solution.
They never were. They never were. I want to be clear, it's hell on earth, and many died, but this is not part of the same thing. It's not part of the same thing. Now the same kind of guards, SS guards would do both. And this was really inefficient. Do you remember American slavery? What do slaves do to fight back? Yeah, they break stuff. And that's what they did. They risked their life to sabotage German equipment. And German equipment by 43 would be notorious for breaking down all the time. They fought back, knowing they could be tortured and killed, and many were. And there were revolts, and there were attempted escapes, and they did fight back through rebellion, many of them ending tragically, but also they fought back by breaking stuff. And think about how many things you could break on a tank. And they would never know until they got to the front. So this would be crucial. So the Germans would have a rocket building program, and only about half of them would work because the slave laborers who made them did everything they could to mess them up. Slaves don't like slavery. I know you remember the positive good theory and you're indoctrinated, but no. But this is part of the concentration camp system. And so when the Allies, the Western Allies, liberated camps, and they showed us as examples of the Holocaust, yes, it's close, but these are concentration camps. And most of them were political prisoners and or slave laborers. And there's going to be millions of them. About 10 million. And here's an example of them fight back. I showed you this in special topics. So here's the Auschwitz concentration camp. See these barracks? These are old barracks. Now it's a museum. And little ways to fight back, but they mean something. This was just, it's such a great one. I don't know why. I admire the people who did this. Obviously the prisoners made this sign, Arbeit macht free. Remember, work will set you free. Work makes you free. Do you see it? Oh, I know it. Anybody see it? Arbeit. Do you see it? Do you see it? Look at the B. It's upside down. They put it upside down. Just a little thing, but it's like, yeah, good for you. Fought back a little bit, and I'm glad they kept that sign. The B is upside down. Arbeit macht free. Work makes you free. Well, Jews in areas they conquered, and remember, there are very few Jews within Germany. Jews in areas they conquered, they put into ghettos. Some were hidden, or some hid, some were able to escape to the countryside. The Soviet Union was fast, so many escaped. But most were told, and there were rebellions in these, most famously in Warsaw in 1942. But for the most part, they thought if we just go along, we won't get killed. But they did fight back. I want to be clear. So they walled them off. They put those who could work with the skill they want, they put on about 400 to 500 calories a day diet. For those who couldn't work, aka they had skills that nobody wanted, 100 to 200 calories a day to starve them to death, especially children. And it would be filled with starving children. These were absolute hellholes. These are the guards, these are soldier commanders, and these were usually Jews who were basically given a little more food if they would be the guards and round people up, thinking that that would save their lives. It would. It would. And now, these are in the camps. These are soldier commanders who's building the wall. A little bit of work inside the camp. They would have to wear an armband to start with. Concentration camps had on their chest, in the ghettos here. In the weird way this worked, Jews had a better chance of surviving if they were a political prisoner or a slave laborer in a camp than in the ghettos. Most people associate the camps with what's going to happen. It doesn't change the horror of it, but it's just different. Well, now what to do about this enemy within, or as they called it, the Jewish question. So that's where we get, you've heard of the final solution to the Jewish question. This should all give us a little bit of start. I've used something questioned before. Right before Indian removal, what to do about American Indians east of the Mississippi. And they called it in the United States, the Indian question. Citizens of the United States. That should all give us a little pause. So, what to do about this enemy within? Once again, think the war's going badly. To the German point of view, they thought they'd win in 6 weeks. Now they know it's going to be a long war. And Germany now is going to fight a two-front war. They remember World War I. And don't forget, I just can't emphasize this enough. Now we got an enemy within, and we're fighting to the finish. So what Hitler did is they changed their rhetoric. And they turned it around from we're trying to conquer land in the east for Lebensraum to only Germany can stop this Jewish conspiracy. And it's a war to stop Jews. And that's the only reason they did it. And everybody fighting against them is part of this Jewish conspiracy. So they have no choice. Now that's totally changing what happened in the war, but it's using the horrific logic of total war. And those are Jews being rounded up in the Warsaw Ghetto. So they've concentrated those. Some of them are working, some they're starving to death. But now what to do? Well, in areas controlled by the Soviets in 1941, so areas they conquered in Barbarossa, they used the Einsatz group. Remember, those are the people who followed behind. And they recruited people in the areas of the Soviet Union, like Ukrainians mad at the Soviet Union, or Belarusians, or they would recruit Russian soldiers who they captured. You want to starve in a prison camp? We'll do this. And a lot of them chose this. And they went behind. At first, they just started kind of haphazardly doing it, doing to Jews, as I mentioned yesterday. And then they started liquidating the ghettos they set up here. And they shot them by the millions. 2 to 3 million they shot. That is a group of Einsatz group, and I cut out what just happened. These are German, but sometimes Ukrainian, Russian, people they recruited and just murdered. Right here, that's where they shot. And this was seen as relatively inefficient to the German point of view. It is cruelty beyond my comprehension. There's another, that's a member of an Einsatz group, and that's Ukraine, Jews being led to where they're going to be shot. And that is for areas, so all the areas in East they conquered were Einsatz group, or these groups like it, these Soder commandos and other groups. And these were the most villainous people you could imagine. And the only way the soldiers could get through the hell of doing this is they were all drunk all the time and just murderous. It's beyond belief how bad they were. What about areas they conquered before? That would be the death camps. And so using the same model as the concentration camps, so in Western Poland first, and then the rest of Europe. Poland had the second largest population. So in the ghettos in these areas, they made 5 camps. Chelmo, Treblinka, Majinek, Sobibor, and Belznik. There was a massive rebellion in Sobibor that some didn't manage to escape. But that's where they round up, those are people in, this is the Krakow ghetto. So that was actually the last of the Polish ghettos. And they round up all of them. 90% of the Polish Jews are going to be killed. A few were able to escape as workers, or they escaped to the countryside and fought as partisans, but they were killed. And these were in these 5 camps here. Most of them are carbon monoxide. And then at the Auschwitz complex, they built another camp called Birkenwald. And that would be for the Jews for the rest of Europe. And that would be that camp would kill the rest. $2.1 to $2.9 million. It starts getting a little fuzzy. They get very good stats. That's Majinek, and this is the first place they use Zyklon B gas instead of carbon monoxide in the crematorium where they would burn the body, and then they would grind up the bones and try to hide it because they know what they're doing. This is Birkenwald. This is the biggest one. So Jews from France or Italy, the biggest area would be Hungary, would be brought here. They'd be separated. Some who could work in the camp would live in the camp. Those who were seen as not able to work, they would be sent right to shop. There were showers. They looked like showers. They would lock them in and then gas them with Zyklon B. So that is where this comes from. So it's different than the concentration camps. And actually, most of the Soder commander here, they actually survived. They'd be forced marched into Germany before the Soviets came. And most of them would be liberated in Buchenwald or Dachau prison by the British and Americans. Here, that's a little train tower right there. That's still there. The rest of the camp was destroyed. They tried to blow up the gas chambers and the crematorium before the Soviets went there, but you can tell it's still there. And now that's a memorial. And I showed you guys that yesterday in special topics. And so I did show you these pictures. That's the picture I took looking back at this, and I'm up here, taking this picture, they reconstructed a couple of barracks. All the fences are still there because they have cement posts. And when I was there, Israel will send junior high students, some, either from Israel, but also some from America. They will help pay for it, and they have this program to go here and see what happened. And so these are Jewish junior high, 12, 13, 14-year-olds, and we just happened to be there. Always wearing white shirts. I didn't know it till I got there. They were all from Israel. No idea until I got there. And those just happened. And I really want to give you this idea about the separation between the camps and the death camps. But after the war, this was kind of forgotten. So here's the liberation of Auschwitz. Those who were still in camp would be liberated by the Russians. Most were political prisoners by then, and their children. And there they are. They can hardly move. Some are celebrating. Some can't move anymore. Nobody acknowledged this. People just acted like it didn't happen. But in the almost forgot. The Germans tried to save everything. So I showed this picture before. These are not all in the museum. These are Soviet pictures. The glasses from the victims, artificial limbs. There's a whole thing of gold fillings there. There's a thing of shoes, suitcases. This massive room, which I found it very difficult to look at, was women's hair. I think wigs out of it or something horrible. They shaved the victims after they were killed. So in the 1960s, this used to be called the Holocaust. And that really wasn't used before. And the Holocaust are not just Jews who were killed, the Shama, but this is everybody. 10 million undesirables, including, for example, Romas, who were gypsies, homosexuals, people who are mentally or physically disabled, and 6 million Jews. Probably slightly under that. When you get numbers that big, it's hard to even comprehend. Nobody talked about it. One country really pushed this. The brand new country of Israel. And the United States, kind of this collective guilt for not doing nothing before the war and then ignoring afterwards. That's part of the reason they're going to become such close allies of Israel in the late 1960s. They were no friend of Israel until then. Now we give them billions of dollars of weapons every year, but it wasn't like that before. So, that's the chain. That's the gas chambers that are blown up. That's the reconstructed. I'm really glad I went, but it was tough. It was hard. In some pictures I don't like to show. But I wanted to show you, it's important to understand the differences and what happened there. And the other thing is, I would just remember this too. I was talking to my wife about this the other day, and we're going, God, it was such a beautiful day. It's such a weird thing. And then, wow, it was good. I went. Now we got to jump into the Pacific. So the Pacific, this is now a different type of war. This is not this war of annihilation. This is a war of empires. And remember Open Door? China wasn't really colonized completely, but after the Boxer Rebellion, all the powers kind of carved China up. And so Japan, they are trying to expand their empire, and they would justify it by saying, we're doing the same thing the British did or the Americans did. But we say, no, it's different now. So, Japan. Japan was devastated by the Depression. And their shaky democracy, which they had a constitution, they had a parliament, they had a prime minister, their civilian government was shaky, and the army began to overturn it. And the big reason the army said, we have to control our resources. That's why the Depression was so bad here. We don't have our oil. They became obsessed with this. This should sound a little familiar, doesn't it sound a little bit like what Germany is thinking? We don't have our resources. And so I already mentioned this once before. That's why they took Manchuria. The army just did it, and the civilian government collapsed. They kept a prime minister. They kept a diet, but the army took over. The army is going to run Germany. I'm sorry, Japan. It's not quite fascist, but it has elements, similar kind of authoritarian. In 37, they wanted to do the same thing by getting the resources of China. They attacked the capital, Beijing, which everybody in the English-speaking world called Peking. Thank you, British. And the thought was China would just give in. China was in the middle of a civil war. They would just give in and give the Japanese what they wanted. No, China fought. And it turned into a disaster, a bloody war of attrition in China, where Japan could take places like Shanghai or Nanjing. They used terror to try to convince the Chinese to quit, but they couldn't control it. And so they're stuck in this quagmire. Quagmire means like a swamp they step in and they can't get out of. What do? Well, the Japanese army couldn't imagine pulling out of China, even though it wasn't working. Do you remember the boom bust cycle? Yeah, the boom. And everyone starts overproducing. Prices begin to drop. What does everybody do at the same time when prices drop? They produce more. Japan's going to do the same thing. Well, Manchuria didn't work very well. China didn't work very well. Let's get more. French Indochina. France fell. So their huge colony right here is open for the taking. And they said, which kind of true, weapons were going to the Chinese government through French Indochina. So we'll take that. They took the northern part in 1940, the southern part in 1941. What countries are in, what countries today were part of French Indochina? Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. That was the colony of French Indochina. Now what? Well, this time the United States is freaking out. They are freaking out. The United States, the military is tiny. The Navy is, they really haven't done much for the Navy since the 1920s. U.S. has colonies here and here. Britain is occupied in Europe, and the Netherlands have this massive colony called the Dutch East Indies, and they were conquered by the Germans and had a government in exile in London. The United States is not ready, so they decide to embargo oil. 1940, a small embargo of aviation fuel. In 1941, a much bigger embargo that partially by accident turned into a total embargo. And basically the U.S. said, you got to pull out of French Indochina and China, and we'll start shipping your oil. 90% of the oil that Japan got was from the United States. And so if they lost that oil, Japan would be effectively out of oil for their military by 1941. So this is in 1941 when they did the embargo. Everyone got that? Now, this is a huge move. This is pushing Japan up against the wall. They feel like they have no choice. And there's something else. Remember I told you about the German myth, like the Aryans, and the German myth about they didn't really lose World War I, these myths. Japan had their own myth of feudal knights and their code. What were those feudal knights called? And you may know the code? You're right. But it's called Bushido. And they began to alter and change this old feudal system of Japan before the 1850s. And they made up this code of the samurai called Bushido, of the way that not only the Japanese government should act, but all Japanese citizens. And the greatest dishonor you could bring is to back down, to quit, to surrender. That will bring dishonor to you, the greatest dishonor, and dishonor to the emperor. Now, the emperor didn't really have any political power, but was seen through Bushido as kind of this living god that no Japanese civilians ever saw or heard. He was this kind of this strange, shy guy who lived in the emperor in a castle in Tokyo, but never bring dishonor. So it was intolerable to the Japanese army to give this up. So if the United States is going to do that, and the United States, I mean, come on, they're pretty weak. Their allies, Britain and France, went to war, and what did the US do? Good luck. So the US won't fight. All they need is one push, and they'll let us do what we want. And what do they want? The Dutch East Indies. The Dutch East Indies have oil. Where are the Dutch East Indies? Right here. Still one of the leading oil producers in the world. What? Indonesia. It's also the second largest population of Muslims in the world, Indonesia. Anybody know the first? Where? Say it again. India. Did someone say India? I didn't hear, I'm sorry. Yeah, India. Even though they're not majority, India is the most populous country in the world, so yeah. Gives you an idea how big India is. It's bigger than Helena. Yeah. So, here's the problem. Let's look at the map. Shall we look at the map? Japan, Dutch East Indies. What's in between? The Philippines. And the Philippines is an American colony. So, they decided we got to occupy the Philippines. We can't let American forces stop us from getting the oil on tankers here to here. So, now what? Well, all we have to do then is knock out the United States Navy and the much smaller in the Pacific Royal Navy, because the British fleet is in Britain. Knock them out, and they'll sue for peace. I think I put that down. Yeah, force the U.S., but also Britain, but force the U.S. just to sue for peace, and let the Japanese take what they want. So I want to be very clear. This was never a plan to totally defeat the United States, to occupy the United States. It was to short colonial war, show the United States it's not worth it, and then do what they want in Asia. Britain had colonies in Hong Kong, Borneo, Malaya, which is today Malaysia, and Singapore, and of course India. Oh no, don't forget Australia. And so knock them out. Take what they want. The United States had moved their Pacific fleet from San Francisco, this was after Indochina, San Francisco to here. Where's that? Pearl Harbor is it's a shallow harbor that they dredged, even though it's still very shallow, on Oahu, in the American colony of the Hawaiian Islands. Remember, the US took that in 1898. And so the Japanese thought, if we do an attack on the US fleet there, remember that, remember I told you about one big battle? You fought one big battle. And they'll just surrender. They'll just quit. Not surrender, but just sue for peace, do what you want. Thus, they're going to attack in all 6 of their large aircraft carriers to do a raid here, but they're also going to attack Malaya, Singapore, Hong Kong, Philippines, here, Guam, and the Solomons in a massive, huge, unprecedented attack. And so Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. Now, the Japanese plan was to declare war, have their ambassador go to the U.S. Secretary of State, and in essence declare war a half hour before the Japanese planes hit Pearl Harbor. So the Japanese planes would actually be taken off at dawn and be in the air. They attacked on Sunday, December 7th, knowing that the Americans were probably on their least preparedness. The U.S. knew something was up, but they just never dreamed they would attack the Hawaiian Islands, without maybe the Philippines. The planes would be in air, they would declare war, and it would not be a surprise attack. Remember, the Japanese did that surprise attack to the Russians in the Russo-Japanese War. So it would not be a surprise attack on an American base, military base in a colony. But the coded messages had to be decoded and then typed into English. And because of secrecy, they sent home their American secretaries and clerks. So they had Japanese staffers typing on English typewriters that they did not use. They delivered the message an hour after the attack. And remember I told you, let me finish it real quick. US code breakers had broken the code, the Japanese code. The Secretary of State Stimson actually had the message on his desk when the Japanese arrived. But it's too late to stop the attack.
Really big important, like, we're too late.
And can you think of anything that would make the United States more angry than a sneak attack?
Oil.
Good point. Good point. You got me there. If they could have got to San Francisco, we would have been in real trouble. They did. A Japanese submarine did shell. A Japanese submarine did shell Long Island or Long Beach. Really? Yeah.
Wow.
And another Japanese submarine sailed up the Columbia.
And then when I was in middle school, I was reading like World War I, World War II books where it was like the fiction, like the fine line, like My American Diary books.
Oh, that's cool.
So I love those.
I remember
I
those.
think I read all of them growing up. I read like the Amelia Earhart and one. No, I think I read every single one of the library.
Which one's the like, what are they called? The My American Diary. I read like,
No, what were the ones we read like the big head?
Hold on, I take a while to listen to myself.
What do I get out of the deal?
Kit Kats,
Ooh, okay.
and I can invite you to our reunion in 10 years.
So I'll be this old retired guy coming in.
Yeah, just for fun, because Kate will be there, and Kenzie, and Kathleen.
I will be long retired then.
You will be long retired.
All right, I can do it.
You signed everybody.
I said I'd invite him to the reunion and get him Kit Kats. And
He's not, are you not questioning
my ability?
Is Greta qualified? He questioned.
What did I
Do you want me to give you my
I
speech?
gave it to you and I asked if, I just said, could you sign this? And you go, you weren't even gonna tell me what it was. It was like signing
I
your
told
life.
him what
She
it
told
was.
me.
I
Yeah, I
said,
didn't tell you.
Yeah, you can
please
here,
my
sign
form
this.
for senior class president.
And then she immediately promised a bribe.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, but we're filming this. I would never take a bribe.
Yes, you would.
Hey.
That's how I do good on my tests. I'm doing
What's his age?
the 17th.
4.
Yeah.
There you
Thank
go.
you.
When are they voting on that? How many votes do I get?
I don't know, I think it's like, as long as you're voting.
Go, Rob, you're president.
We got a big day today.
Go, Rob. We gotta go. Rob, you're like, this is the